Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the webinar tonight. We are going to look back at immigration policy changes that were implemented in 2021 as they affected physician immigration, and we will discuss presidential proclamations, congressional inaction, agency policy changes, and more. We will also discuss potential immigration developments for 2022. And I look forward to introducing our speaker here in just a few moments. As everyone is logging in, I want to go ahead and take a moment to introduce myself. My name is Ashley Pichard. I am the new program relations specialist here at PracticeMatch. And before I joined PracticeMatch, I was an in-house physician recruiter. And in that role, I really gained a passion for helping physicians in their journey from training to employment, whether that was helping them with CV review or preparing them on how to prepare for an interview. I always told them, even if you don't choose the institution that I am working for, I'm happy to provide you with mentorship and career guidance. So here at PracticeMatch, I get to take that passion to the next level by working with residency and fellowship programs nationwide to offer career guidance and mentorship to their physicians from medical school all the way through applying for their dream job. So hopefully, since you're here tonight, you already know a little bit about what PracticeMatch has to offer physicians. If not, I'm just going to go ahead and highlight a few of the resources that my team and I have to offer to make sure that you get the most out of your PracticeMatch experience before Elissa joins us and starts talking to us about everything that's going on in immigration right now. So here at PracticeMatch, we have free CV review, free CV builder. We have scholarships. We have a job board where you can see postings and filter them by specialty, geographic location, visa status, and more. You can create a profile and fill your preferences. That way we can notify you about jobs that come open that match what you're looking for. We also have virtual career fairs to connect you with employers hiring in your specialty. You can even earn some additional revenue by attending those, and even more revenue by becoming a physician promoter and encouraging your colleagues to attend. We have monthly webinars on various topics regarding training, interview preparation, contract negotiation, immigration assistance, loan repayment, and more. And if you think your program would benefit from a personalized training on any topic mentioned above, we can do that too. We have a free immigration law book, or law handbook, I should say, that is provided by Siskind. Our hostess tonight is going to be telling us about that. And we also have a network of experts in just about every physician-related industry. So if you ever have a question related to career guidance, you can absolutely reach out to PracticeMatch, and we'll be happy to provide you with mentorship and guidance. That's okay. While we are waiting for Elissa to get back on, I can go ahead and tell you guys, I know everybody is getting ready to go on holiday break and sort of recharge your batteries. I hope you all enjoy that very much, but I'm looking forward to seeing you back in 2022. We have already our next webinar is scheduled. So that is going to be on January 18th. It is right after our first nationwide career fair. So if you're available on January 18th, please join us for the career fair and join us for the webinar after. We're actually going to be inviting one of our physicians back that worked with us while he was a resident all the way through becoming an attending physician. And he was a physician promoter and really took advantage of a lot of the things that PracticeMatch had to offer. And ultimately, he found his dream job while attending a PracticeMatch career fair. He met his recruiter there and now is in his dream job. So he's going to tell us a little bit about that and how you can kick off your year by making the most of your PracticeMatch experience. All right, guys, the moment we have been waiting for. Elissa Taub is a partner in the immigration law firm Siskind, where she leads the firm's healthcare immigration practice. She handles numerous matters for physicians, including J-1 waivers, H-1Bs, the green card applications. Elissa is also the co-author of the Physician Immigration Handbook. She's an active member of American Immigration Lawyers Association and has served on several national committees. She is also a leader within the American Health Law Association. She earned her law degree from Villanova University School of Law and her bachelor's degree from Washington University in St. Louis. And it is my pleasure to introduce Elissa Taub. Elissa, I'm going to go ahead and hand the host back over to you. That way you can turn your camera on. And if you want to pop it back over to me, then I will I'll hide myself again.
Awesome. Happy to.
We all know tech problems, right?
Yes. Well, it's really nice to be with you all finally. And let's see if I can, there we go, make host, we're all good. Yes. All right. It's really good to be with you all. Apologies, I had some unexpected internet hiccups right as we were getting started. Everything was great, and then it wasn't. So thank you all for your patience. As Ashley said, my name is Elissa Taub. I'm an immigration attorney. I am pretty deeply immersed in physician immigration matters. It's the bulk of my law practice, and I'm very happy to be here talking with you, sort of a year in review discussion. And we'll look ahead a little bit into 2022. Of course, with immigration, as I'm sure you all know, we never really want to rely on our crystal ball and make bold predictions, but I will make some maybe less bold predictions about what might be coming in the new year. I wanted to let you all know, and I think some folks already have put some questions in the chat. And I am happy to answer questions as we go. If I see that a question is relevant to what we're discussing at the moment, and otherwise we'll kind of take those questions at the end of the session. And I will share my contact information toward the end in case there are some questions that we don't get to, which is pretty possible, considering that we may get a lot of questions. So without further ado, let's dive in. And I'm going to shut my camera while we're talking. That way you don't have to worry about me and you can kind of focus on the slides. So I'm going to do that right now. And okay, so let's dive into the slides. There we go. Okay. At the beginning of 2021, actually in January of this year, I did a PracticeMatch webinar that was like the night before the inauguration. And we talked about what might be ahead for 2021. And we talked about a variety of different types of changes that might be coming with the new administration. And I went back to that presentation and I took my very first slide from that presentation. And basically we can kind of do almost like a report card style analysis of whether the things that we thought were going to happen at the beginning of 2021 actually happened. Or if they did happen, kind of the format that they took, right? How quickly did they happen? How slowly did they happen? And ultimately, what's the upshot of those changes? So the first thing that we talked about in that presentation was the Biden administration saying that they were going to restore humanity in the immigration programs for the United States. And I think, in some sense that they've achieved this, right? The rhetoric that's coming out of the administration in a lot of senses is a lot more immigrant friendly. We're not getting, major changes every Friday at 5 o'clock that are somehow seeking to restrict immigration to the United States. But I think if we look at USCIS processing delays, if we look at some of what's going on at the border, I don't think that we've really seen a full restoration quote unquote humanity and immigration programs. So overall, I think the administration's done a good job of moving us forward, but they haven't really realized the full potential of what they could do. The second thing we talked about in January was that we were going to see a change in leadership across all of government, right? We have a new Homeland Security Secretary in Ali Mayorkas. We have a new USCIS director in Orjadu. We have a new Secretary of State in Antony Blinken, a new Department of Labor chair, Secretary in Marty Walsh. We have all of these new leaders of these agencies that are very key in immigration processing in the United States. All came in with huge accolades and resumes, and we were very excited for what we would see out of them. And overall, I think a lot of us on this presentation can agree that they have not been as dynamic and forward thinking and as transformative as maybe we were hoping they would be. And so there's still a lot in store. That said, on the very next slide, we're going to talk about some really amazing advances that USCIS has made over the last year. So it's not all negative. I think our optimism and our hope at the beginning of this year was such that the changes that we've seen over the course of the year have been much more incremental, smaller steps than maybe we were hoping they would be at the beginning of the year. So one of the key changes that happened almost immediately with the Biden administration was the rescission of the Muslim ban that existed for pretty much all 4 years of the Trump administration. That was pretty much a first day in office type of action. That was great and largely applauded so that folks from the 7 banned countries would be able to travel to the United States again. The challenge was that we also had COVID-related travel bans in effect. So we rescinded one ban while keeping another ban or many other bans in place. And the Biden administration even expanded the COVID-related travel bans over the course of 2021 to include India. Those bans were in effect until November 8th. So we had very significant disruptions in the ability of folks to travel to the United States. And for those of you who are here in the United States, significant restrictions in your ability to, go back to your home country, obtain a visa stamp and return to the United States, either because of travel bans or because of significant scaling back in the Department of State's operations around the world, which makes getting a visa stamp even to this day extraordinarily difficult. The travel bans, as I mentioned, were all rescinded on November 8th and replaced with a vaccination and testing requirement, which is a worldwide requirement. And, to me, a lot more targeted on actually controlling or trying to control the spread of COVID more than restricting, travel from a particular region of the world, since a pandemic by definition is a worldwide outbreak. COVID exists in every corner of the world. So it seems silly to have these travel bans. Nevertheless, we just instituted one on November 29th for the countries in Southern Africa in reaction to the development of the Omicron variant. That's going to be in place for at least 30 days, and we'll see. I have a feeling it'll be extended initially, but hopefully it'll be rescinded quickly because it's here and not necessarily restricting the travel from those folks in Southern Africa isn't necessarily contributing or not contributing at this point, in my opinion. We also had from the early days of the pandemic, these non-immigrant visa and immigrant visa bans, and those have both been lifted and have been lifted for a while. Nevertheless, as I mentioned, the Department of State is still extremely backlogged and extremely limited in offering non-immigrant visa appointments like for H's and O's and immigrant visa appointments for those who are applying for green cards from outside the US. The government is so backlogged that it's probably still going to be a few years on the immigrant visa side until they fully catch up and can kind of handle cases in the usual course again. All very, very frustrating. One thing I did want to mention, this question has come up a few times recently. Under the old COVID-related travel bans, a lot of folks who resided in the countries or who visited the countries that were banned, like India, like Europe, China, Iran, Brazil, South Africa, they were able to obtain national interest exemptions, or NIEs as we call them, to return to the United States, notwithstanding those bans. Those NIEs have all been rescinded. Basically, they're void because those travel bans don't exist anymore. in their place, as I mentioned, we have this vaccination and testing regime now, and there are very extremely limited exceptions to the vaccination and testing requirements. And there is a national interest exception available there, except you cannot reuse a previously issued NIE from the COVID travel ban to address the vaccination requirement. You would need to apply again. So just know those visa stamps are still valid, but the NIE that might have been granted cannot be used for any other purpose at this point. Those have been voided. You don't need it now because there's no travel ban. So for most folks, that shouldn't be an issue. Also, the CDC keeps a list of countries where vaccination is not widely available and where less than a certain percentage of the residents are vaccinated. And folks on that list do not have to have COVID vaccination in order to travel to the United States, but may be required to obtain vaccination after being in the US for a couple of months if they're coming on a longer term visa, like an H-1B or an O or something like that. So it's important if you to kind of look at that and see, where somebody might be coming from to determine whether they're exempt from the vaccination requirement or not. And then finally, at the beginning of this administration, Congress introduced the U.S. Citizenship Act. We sometimes referred to it as the Biden bill. That was introduced back in February, and it's all but dead at this point. Congress has still not passed any modicum of any immigration reform or any other immigration related legislation for that matter. And we'll talk a little bit later when we talk about what's ahead in 2022. We'll talk a little bit more about Congress. But for right now, just know there have been no official changes in any statutes, any laws that affect immigration. Regulations, there have been presidential proclamations, there have been policy changes, but in terms of actual statutes that Congress passes, none of that has changed. So the overall immigration regime and structure in the United States has stayed the same. And finally, back at the end of the Trump administration, at the end of 2022, the administration issued in a flurry a bunch of regulations that they were hoping would take effect in time for the new administration that would have significantly affected H-1Bs. It would have significantly affected green card applications. All kinds of craziness would have ensued. All of those regulations were pretty much postponed or vacated by the Biden administration at this point. And so that was pretty immediate in most cases. They just rescinded one this past week. So that was an overall good news. Those regulations would have drastically rewritten how H-1Bs are issued in this country and would have greatly affected green card processing for a good number of people. So we were happy to see those basically scrapped. And so we'll talk about that as we go. So these were the changes we thought were coming right immediately at the beginning of the Biden administration. You can see it's a little mixed bag to exactly how these things have developed. But the good news is that over the course of this year, USCIS has made a tremendous number of policy changes. And this is where I'm going to give the agency its due. I am super critical of USCIS. If you've seen my Twitter feed today, you know it has not been a good day for them in my mind. But I believe in giving credit where it's due. And in these cases, USCIS has made some positive incremental changes that really are helping my clients. And I'm talking about these relevant policy changes, really things that would, affect doctors and your ability to immigrate to the United States or, to change status, to obtain green cards, making our lives a little bit easier in the process. So the first thing just happened last week. And I should mention, these are in no particular order, really just the order of my brain. But the first thing that came to mind as I was putting this together was this waiver of the 60-day expiration date for immigration medical exams. You might know that every person who applies for a green card in the United States has to go for a medical exam and submit the results of that exam to USCIS for review. We recommend that everybody file their adjustment of status application with the medical exam. But one of the complicating factors is that if more than 60 days elapsed from the time that the doctor signed the form, that medical exam, before you file, the medical exam would expire. And so a lot of times, if we didn't have enough time, if we were, there are all kinds of reasons why we might file without the medical exam. And there were times where my clients got their exams too early and they expired and they had to get them redone. Last week, USCIS announced that for the remainder of this fiscal year, so through September 30th, 2022, immigration medical exams will not expire in those 60 days prior to filing. They still have an overall expiration of 2 years. So still not advisable to get your medical exam too early. Talk with your lawyer about when exactly the right time is to do it. I wouldn't want to see you get it like 6 months in advance, because you're going to only have 18 months of validity left on it. But cases where, maybe 70 days elapse, 80 days elapse, right? We're not going to see those medical exams expire. So that's really, really helpful. We've seen a continued waiver of employment-based green card interviews, which is phenomenal. USCIS was wasting a tremendous amount of time interviewing employment-based green card applicants who've already gone through tremendous amount of vetting and in most cases have been in the United States for many years. The ability to get green cards without an interview is huge. That's how things were before October of 2017. So now we are back to the way things should be. And I've had multiple clients just this week receive their green cards, no interview or anything, which is fabulous. USCIS also has waived the biometrics requirement for most, not all, but most I-539 applications. So those of you who are filing H-4 applications or whose spouses might be filing H-4 applications, they will not have to go for biometrics for those H-4s. Biometrics are still required for EADs, those work cards. They're still required for green cards and naturalization applications. But biometrics requirements were significantly delaying the adjudication of H-4 applications and other I-539s. So that was huge. That waiver goes into about May 2023. So it's not a forever suspension, but I hope it'll become that. It's really unnecessary to have those folks go for biometrics. So that was a great change. Still, and I will say, we're still seeing H-4s take a while. It's not that they're back down to being adjudicated directly with the H-1B. And we do have cases that have been pending long before this change was made in May of this year. But for cases filed since this change, we're seeing them take a lot less time to be approved, which is great. USCIS is continuing to allow us extra time to respond to requests for evidence and notices of intent to deny. As a lawyer, I love having an extra 60 days to respond to these requests when we get them. I hope that they continue this grace period. It's been a real benefit, especially as many lawyers are still working from home and especially as many employers are still working from home. The coordination and the inefficiencies have still been there, that have been there throughout COVID. So having that extra time to get this work done is really, really appreciated. USCIS also is now allowing folks who file green card renewals or for green card replacements on Form I-90 to automatically get an extension of their green card, mainly because it's taking them so long to issue the green cards that folks were having to make appointments to go to USCIS offices to get an extension sticker on their card. And that was clogging up the system. So they said, okay, everybody gets an automatic extension. We'll take it. This year, for the first time ever, USCIS conducted 3 H-1B cap lottery selections. Last year, they did 2, and that was the first time they ever did more than 1. This year, it's 3. They may even do a 4th, potentially. Part of this is because there was a record number of H-1B lottery registrations this year, and that was caused in part because people were obtaining multiple job offers and having those multiple employers file multiple registrations for them. And then when they chose the job that they wanted out of those multiple registrations, there were excess numbers there. Somebody might have been selected 2-3 times in the lottery and they choose one employer, then the other 2 petitions don't get filed. So we saw it was almost like an artificial inflation of the H-1B cap lottery registrations this year. And for that reason, USCIS has found itself over the course of this fiscal year not having actually issued enough H-1Bs to meet the cap. So they keep doing additional selections out of the pool of people who filed in March. You cannot resubmit for the lottery. All of these selections are coming out of the initial registrations that were submitted back in March. The H-1B cap lottery for next year will open again in March of 2022, and it will similarly be online like it's been the last couple of years. And I suspect we're going to see something similar happen in the coming year. USCIS also reverted to the 2008 civics test for naturalization applications. This was also fantastic. It has 100 questions in the pool instead of 250. And most of the questions have accurate answers, unlike the newer test that was rolled out in the last administration that had some very biased questions in the question pool. So we were happy to see this reversion to the old civics test. Premium processing was extended to E3 petitions for Australian nationals, which was great. We'll talk a little bit about premium processing when we get to 2022 stuff. The public charge rule was scrapped. Woo-hoo. We never have to submit I-944s with our adjustment of status applications. And I don't have to ask my clients about all of their financial history and credit scores and all of this stuff. It's totally scrapped. We are back to the old public charge rules, which for most of my physician clients is almost a non-entity, which is great. USCIS also reinstated its memo providing deference to prior decisions so that it's not like Groundhog's Day, where every time we file a petition, it's brand new as if nothing ever existed before. We still have to prove every case and resubmit evidence each time, but knowing that the government is going to actually stand by its prior decisions is very nice. The Department of Homeland Security announced TPS for Venezuela, Burma, and Haiti, and USCIS has been implementing TPS for folks from those countries who were here in the United States as of the date of those announcements, and those were very welcome decisions. And finally, as of October 1st, 2021, COVID vaccination is required for all immigration medical exams. This is very important. As I mentioned earlier, there are some limited exceptions to this requirement, but by and large, if you're going to be applying for a green card, you're going to need to show that you're fully vaccinated for COVID by the time you get your immigration medical exam. So it's very important to know. All right. I'm a little out of breath from that. That was a lot of policy changes. Somebody asked about applying for TPS while on J1. You can do that. I've actually had clients who've applied for both and have held both TPS and, while they're in J1 status. Typically what ends up happening with a lot of my clients in that situation is they'll let the J1 lapse and stay on the TPS, depending on your country of, your home country and how long we think TPS might stick around for. That could be really helpful because you can work based on an EAD. The only thing to know is that because you're here on a J1, you're still subject to the home residence requirement. Switching to TPS won't erase that. So eventually you will need a J1 waiver down the road. The only way, and I have a question here about applying for the H-1B lottery on a J1 as a resident. And also important to know, you can't really do that unless you've got a waiver that's going to be approved by the time your H-1B petition would be filed. So if you're selected in the first round of the lottery, you'll have between April 1st and June 30th to file an H-1B petition. If you don't have an approved approved J-1 waiver, you will not be able to switch to H-1B status. So there's no prohibition on putting your hat in the ring for the lottery, but ultimately you have to actually be eligible for H-1B status to get that approved. All right, so let's, I'm gonna go on to the next slide. So these were all USCIS policy changes that have happened this year. We're going to talk about some other relevant changes that have been going on and basically some hot topics, not so much changes, but just stuff that is going on in other parts of the government as it relates to immigration and physician immigration. So the last PracticeMatch webinar that I did was all about the visa bulletin and some of the chaos that was ensuing and kind of explaining how the visa bulletin works. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time going over that here. It's very complicated. We could spend an hour on that, which I did previously, but I just want to mention it here because the visa bulletin is definitely in flux this fiscal year. As we all know, the Immigration Service did not use all of the green cards that it could have in the last fiscal year. And, going into this year, we thought that there was going to be kind of a glut of green cards, and there still is a large number, record number of green cards available this year, but not as many as there could have been to really put a dent in some of the backlogs that we see. What the Department of State has said is that it looks like EB3 for India is going to move very slowly or not at all through a bunch of this fiscal year. As consulates are opening up overseas to immigrant visa processing, especially like in Manila and Vietnam, there are a lot of EB3 nurses that have been waiting for their green cards over the last year. A lot of those are starting to be issued now. So it looks like there may be a cutoff date for EB3 worldwide, as in the summertime, as USCIS and the Department of State endeavor to use all of the numbers in that category. On the other hand, EB2 looks like it's going to stay current through the whole year for the rest of the world. And for India, it looks like from what the most recent guidance is, the visa bulletin may move quite far ahead in January, February to try to spark demand, right? To kind of see what's out there. And if they get a lot of applications, then they may pull it back. But if they don't, then EB2 India may continue moving. So this is going to really be a month by month thing. I checked today like 3 times. The January visa bulletin wasn't out the last time I looked. Maybe tomorrow. This is the time of year it comes. However, Charlie Oppenheim, the guy at the Department of State who manages the visa bulletin, is retiring at the end of this month. He said he's going to be working with the new person in that role, who I don't know who that is yet, to help them determine and kind of work through the January visa bulletin. So this will probably be the last one that he has anything to do with. And for that reason, I think it may be a little delayed, but hopefully sometime between today and Monday or Tuesday, we'll see it. That would be great. I'd really like to know what's going to happen for January and what I need to prepare for. So we shall see. So the visa bulletin is, an ongoing hot topic, and it's going to, be something that we watch on a monthly basis very closely. All right, let's talk a little bit about the Department of State. The U.S. Department of State is having some issues, to put it mildly, on a number of fronts. And I think it's important to understand a little bit about each one of these. Some of it affects J1 waivers, some of it affects visa stamping and consular processing. And all of it, let's just say if something has to go through the Department of State, the chances are it's going to happen slowly, or there's going to be a delay or some kind of complication. And there are lots of reasons for all of that. I won't get into all the details. It's, a lot of it is COVID related, but at the same time, one would think that this agency could kind of figure out a way forward the way so many of the rest of us have. So the first thing is J1 waiver processing delays. We are seeing the Department of State continue to work fairly slowly on processing J1 waivers. This time of year, it's a little deceptive because the volume of cases that they're seeing is very low. Most of the Conrad 30 waivers haven't gotten to them yet from around the country. Even a lot of waivers from like the DRA and some of the federal agencies haven't gotten there yet. We're just at the middle of December. But come February, March, a lot of waivers are going to be sitting there at the Department of State. And I would caution to not expect those cases to move as quickly as some of the ones that are there now are. We saw the same thing last year. And I think if I could give you any advice on that, it's to just expect when your case gets to the Department of State, which is step 2 of the waiver process, it's just going to take a little while. It's going to take a few months. And in our office, we inquire of the Department of State. We stay really on top of these things. If we're starting to get to a point where we see somebody's contract start date is coming or somebody's status is going to expire, we'll ask them to expedite it. They usually will. But short of that, while you're still in, finishing up your training program, it's just going to be a waiting game. And it stinks. I got more information last week about literally paper applications are being walked from one desk to another. We're not talking about a high-tech operation. The other things with the Department of State, as I mentioned, Non-immigrant visa appointments continue to be extremely hard to get in many areas of the world. I know it's very hard in India. Other places people are telling me they're trying on the website, they can't even get a regular appointment so that they could even ask for an expedited appointment after that. So just be mindful. If you're planning on traveling internationally, you need to plan ahead, and you're going to need to, take whatever the first available consular appointment is. And if that's too far into the future, you're going to need to go through the procedure to ask for an expedited or emergency appointment so that you can get it sooner. Most of the time, doctors are faring really well in that. Most of the time, doctors are getting those expedited appointments. And so after the fact, people are like, oh, that didn't seem like such a big deal. But on the front end of it, it can be really jarring when you look and you see the first available appointment is like 6 months down the road or longer. The other thing is, I talked about this a little bit earlier, the consulates around the world are still backlogged on issuing immigrant visas from the end of April until the end of February, April 2020 to the end of February 2021, no consulates were basically issuing green cards abroad. Very limited exceptions. They're now doing them very slowly in a weird hierarchical fashion where they're prioritizing family cases over employment cases and all kinds of nonsense. It's happening slowly. But, if you're planning or you have a family member planning to process their green card abroad, know that it could be a while. That said, DOS policy very specifically says that nurses and doctors are eligible for expedites. And I am seeing nurses get expedited pretty regularly, which is good news. But still, the expectation should be it's going to take a while. So that's the Department of State. And like I said, it's one of the things we were really hopeful for when we had a new Secretary of State was that he would kind of do this whole big shakeup in the agency. In the last administration, the Department of State had hiring freezes. When people left, they weren't replacing them. For that reason, a lot of offices within the Department of State became very understaffed, and then COVID happened and everything, just snowballed. And so far, we've not really seen, systemic change in the agency, which is very unfortunate. Litigation. I'm not going to give updates on specific cases, but I want to mention that over the last year or two, mass immigration litigation has been very effective on a number of fronts. Full disclosure, our office is very, very much on the forefront of bringing a lot of these suits. We have some joint venturers that we're working with on those. The American Immigration Lawyers Association has been a great partner on some cases. And there are other law firms as well that are doing really fantastic work on suing the government and trying to hold them accountable for bad decisions, bad policies, bad implementation of policies. Not every lawsuit is going to be successful. That's sort of the nature of the beast, but it has been a very effective tool to try to hold the government accountable because nobody else seems to be doing it. There was I think it was a Senate Judiciary Committee hearing a month or so ago where they had the Secretary of Homeland Security in front of them, and not one person asked a question about employment-based immigration or USCIS accountability or anything about it. They were all focused on the border and security. Those are very important topics, but they completely ignored a very important aspect of the Department of Homeland Security, which is the efficient administration of the immigration laws of the United States, which is supposed to be undertaken by USCIS. Not one question was asked. So litigation and suing that agency is one way of trying to hold them accountable and forcing change to happen. And the same is true with the Department of State. We've had some very good decisions and good success stories suing the Department of State because some of the shenanigans they were pulling with visa processing abroad. So wanted to kind of just give a shout out to those who were involved in those cases and to any of you who may have been plaintiffs in those cases. Like I said, they're not always successful, but you don't know until you go through it and you try. And it certainly, feels good to try to have the government quaking in its boots a little bit because they know we're not just going to take it on the chin. We're going to come and fight them on it. All right. I'm going to switch gears for just a second, but let's see. Yeah, there's a question here about expediting EADs. Anybody who has an EAD application pending on any basis can ask the government to expedite it. So the question here was about whether if you have a physician national interest waiver pending and the EAD is based on that, can you ask USCIS to expedite? You can, but I'll give you a couple of words of caution. First is that today, and I was going to get into this in a few minutes, but today, USCIS announced its processing data from fiscal year 2021, and they revealed that they have a backlog of 8 million applications in the agency. 8 million. Pre-COVID, it was 5.7 million. So in the last couple of years, their backlog of the cases that are being processed in the agency has grown tremendously. Out of that 8 million, 1.5 million applications are EADs. Now and that's the whole universe of EADs, right? So DACA, TPS EADs, adjustment EADs, H4 EADs, J2 EADs, right? Any kind of EAD. There's 1.5 million EAD applications in the system. Expedite requests are getting denied way more or often than they're being approved. And oftentimes all we're getting in response is an email from USCIS that says, your case is very important to us. We get lots of these requests. Sorry, we can't grant them all. Too bad for you. And that may be sometimes after we've submitted documentation in support of the expedite request. And I'm talking about nurses and doctors. I'm talking about people who don't have any other status to rely on, right? No H-1B that they can work on, no O-1 opportunity. Literally, the only thing that can keep these folks at work is an EAD. And the government's like, your call is very important to us. Sorry, we can't answer it right now. It is extraordinarily frustrating. On my Twitter feed today, I had it. So if you follow me on Twitter, you may have seen a little bit of that today. It's extraordinarily frustrating. I'm seeing doctors, sitting on the sidelines, not being able to go to work, who work in ICUs and who are hospitalists and emergency medicine physicians. And we're facing this COVID and flu surge this winter, and they're not able to work. Extraordinarily frustrating. So yes, you can ask for an expedite, but be realistic about the fact that everybody's asking for expedites and the government's denying most of them. If you really have what's the word I'm looking for? A compelling case for why your case should be expedited, I'd recommend maybe talking to your congressman or senator. They can sometimes be very effective in getting these cases pushed through. Not always. Though their requests also get denied a lot of the times, but that's a good way to go. And if you have an EAD that's really pending a long time, I'm not talking about 2 months. I'm talking about like 8, 9, 10 months or more. Filing a mandamus action, basically suing the government to force them to issue your card, is also an option. So, right now there's just no good, reliable way to get USCIS to do its job and issue EADs. To me, it's like that should be one of the easiest things that they do. And it's causing just so much heartache and difficulty, all over the place. It's a nationwide problem. So thank you for asking that question, because it gave me a second to get on my soapbox about it. It's been bugging me all day. So anyhow, let's switch gears for just a minute and talk about J1 waivers, right? I've gone this whole time. This is a PracticeMatch webinar. I work in physician immigration, and I have not really talked about J1 waivers at all. So I felt like they needed their own slide. And so I want to just give a little update on what's going on this year on J1 waivers and kind of some up to the minute updates on processing of those waivers. I did talk about on the last slide how the Department of State's taking a while, but there are some other updates I want to give. So the first thing is I have a list of states that have confirmed to us that they have closed their programs for the year they are full. There may be a couple other states that should be added to this list, but I didn't have firm confirmation, and I didn't want to add them to the list unless I knew that they were closed. But here's that list. Take notes, write it down, take a picture. These are the states that if you're looking to go through a Conrad 30 program, these states are full. HHS has unlimited spots. So if it's primary care and you're looking at a facility or a practice that's in an HPSA with a score of 7 or higher, you have no fellowship training or no more than a year of fellowship training. By the time June comes, you can still go through HHS in these states. Some of these states, like Kentucky, has some areas that are in the DRA, right? So there still could be some DRA applications available there. Parts of Virginia are in the ARC, right? So it's not that all locations in these states are gone, but the Conrad 30 programs in these states are full. Okay, I want to give a quick update on some changes at the DRA. The DRA is the Delta Regional Authority. It is a federal agency that can grant J1 waivers to doctors, both specialists and primary care physicians. It covers the Mississippi Delta region of the United States, so parts of, very small parts of Missouri and Illinois, some of Western Kentucky, lots of Western Tennessee, Eastern Arkansas, Western, kind of like the Western half of Mississippi, almost all of Louisiana, and a small part of Alabama, which if you know US geography, it's not on the river, but it's still in the DRA. So there are about 250 counties in those 7 states that are in the DRA's jurisdiction. It's a fabulous waiver program. As I mentioned, unlimited waiver slots. This year, they have announced a policy that not only the DRA requires employers who apply through that program to engage in some very specific recruitment. And the type of recruitment they require is not usual for most employers, like notifying medical schools in the state about the opportunity and things like that. So a lot of times an employer will identify a candidate and want to sign a contract with that candidate, and then they'll go back and comply with the recruitment requirements because they found the candidate through other recruitment methods, but they need to do this to comply. The DRA has said they don't want to see a contract signed before the recruitment with a date before the 45 days of recruitment are complete. And in fact, they don't want to see anything signed by the doctor in that application until 45 days have elapsed from when the recruitment has run. This is really important. It's delaying the filing of our DRA applications by, in some cases, a full 45 days. That's not a reason not to use the DRA's program. As I mentioned, there are lots of really good reasons to go through that program, namely because they have unlimited waiver slots and it preserves Conrad 30 slots in those states for those who aren't in the DRA. So it's a great program, but just know if your lawyer was like just about ready to file your waiver application, or if you're embarking on a DRA application and all of a sudden they put the brakes on it and say we can't file for 45 days, there's a reason behind that. And the reason is they want to get your case approved and not have the DRA kick it back because there are some dates in the application that they don't agree with. I was at a conference, a physician immigration conference last week. We specifically put this question to the administrator of the DRA's program about, well, sometimes these employers are recruiting for these positions for a long time, but they don't go through this type of recruitment. This isn't real. This doesn't make sense. And this is the policy. It's not likely to change anytime soon. So just keep that in mind. And then I just wanted to give a shout out to the HHS waiver program. Again, I mentioned it in a prior bullet about how HHS's clinical waiver program is available for HPSAs, score of 7 or higher, primary care hospitalists without fellowship training, essentially. You have to start the job within a year of completing residency, or no more than a year after completing residency. So if you have more than a year of fellowship, or if you're not going to start like right on July 1, you won't qualify for HHS. But let me tell you, it is a fantastic program. They make recommendations very quickly. There's no extra filing fee. And we've been using it quite a bit since they expanded this program in May of 2020. I can't count on my fingers and toes how many we've done. It's been tremendous. So I just wanted to give a shout out to that program because I talk with doctors every day who haven't heard about this and they get a little nervous about like, what kind of snake oil am I selling them? And I'm like, no, it's real. I promise. It sounds too good to be true, but it's not. great question about when the J1 waiver allocations renew for new spots. So when we say that each state can issue 30 waivers in a year, we're talking about the federal fiscal year. So October 1st through September 30th. Some states open their programs early. Georgia opens for the month of August, and that's it pretty much. Texas opens in early September, as do Virginia and Indiana and New Mexico. New Mexico still has, I think, 5 slots left, something like that. Virginia, we just found out today that Virginia filled, so I added it to the slide. Every state's a little different, but legally the waiver slots open October 1st, and there are a lot of states that open on October 1st. Some of them only open for the month of October or October, November, and have filing deadlines. Others do them on a rolling basis or have a lottery and all kinds of other nonsense. So in the fall. So typically you're going to look at filing your waiver application in the fall of your last year of training, which means that you want to have a contract signed maybe by the end of this, depending on the state, right? Sometime over the summer, early fall, to be able to file on time. So if you're, going to finish your training in 2023, this is a great time to start your job search. And my mantra is it's never too early to start your job search for a waiver job, because there needs to be a fair amount of lead time. All right. So we've talked a lot about 2021. And actually, and before I go on to that, I'm going to answer this next question, which is, can you find a J1 waiver job in the same city as your spouse? The answer is yes. I've done J1 waivers for spouses at the same facility, in the same state, same city. It really depends on the program, right? If you're going to go to a state that's going to fill up very quickly, it might be harder than if you go to an area where there are either unlimited options or a state that never fills, right? Utah, Nevada are states that never fill their waiver slots, but they've got a lot of waiver opportunities. Maybe a lot easier to find a job for spouses in the same facility to get waivers there, or somewhere down here, like in the DRA, in West Tennessee, Memphis, Jackson, Tennessee, or New Orleans. Those are all within the DRA's jurisdiction, and we can get as many waivers as we want. So it's really a good option. Timeline to start a J1 waiver after training without needing to travel to home country. I'm not sure I totally understand that, but almost all of my clients, I would say pretty much all of my clients, stay in the United States throughout their waiver processing. Sometimes we'll recommend that you get a J1 extension for your board exam if you're taking the internal medicine boards in August, or if you have another like specialty board exam coming up in the fall. ECFMG will extend, upon your application, can extend your DS 2019 through the board exam. And a lot of times that gives them, it bridges any kind of gap. So if you're applying for your waiver February or later, a July start date is going to be really difficult to obtain. So because of the government processing. So if you're going to start work in August, September, you're probably going to need to extend your J for boards if you have it. Applying in the fall, I would say the sweet spot is, from when the programs start opening through the end of January to have an early summer start date. If you're filing your waiver after January, it's probably going to be a little bit later. I'm just going to catch some of these J1 questions because they're good and it's a good time to do them. The HHS program is just the HHS clinical waiver program. They also have a research waiver program, not the same thing. And those can be are a tall order, and they're taking about 2.5 years to be approved. So that's a totally different animal. But the HHS clinical waiver program is the one I was talking about. Let's see. Yeah. So on the Canadian question, it is possible for a Canadian citizen to jump to H-1B before getting the waiver. You'll still need a waiver. Getting the H-1B first and using that Canadian loophole does not eliminate the need for the waiver. You still have to deal with the J1 stuff. Marriage to a U.S. citizen does not affect J1, the home residence requirement at all. So if you're on a J1, marry a U.S. citizen, that's great. After you get your waiver and you fulfill any obligations under it, then your spouse can sponsor you for a green card. But you can't skip the J1 stuff by marrying a U.S. citizen. Let's see. I haven't mentioned, I'm going to skip the question about Massachusetts. I'll give my contact information at the end. You can always email me about that. I have to, I'm having a memory lapse at the moment in terms of their deadline. So totally email me about that. I didn't mention the Appalachian Regional Commission. That was probably a little bit accidentally on purpose. But yes, the Appalachian Regional Commission is another federal agency that does give unlimited waivers in the eastern portion through the Appalachian Mountain Range of the United States. The one thing I can say about that program is it's very slow. So it can be a good option if you're applying in a state like the ARC is available in parts of Virginia. So if you're applying in a state that's full and the locations in the ARC's jurisdiction, or like Kentucky has some good ARC locations, so does Tennessee, it could be a good backup option. But because it's so slow, if you're applying for an ARC waiver in April, it's going to be a while before you're going to get to start work in that position. The sweet spot for those is probably in the fall of your last year, even though they're unlimited. It just takes a while to go through that process. Yes, if you fulfill the home residence requirement, you can come back in H-1B status. Then you're just like anybody else on an H-1B. So your issue is going to be dealing with the H-1B cap. You do not get cap exemption by fulfilling the home residence requirement. You only become exempt from the H-1B cap by getting a Conrad 30 or other underserved area waiver. And I know I don't have time to go through what it means to be cap exempt and what the H-1B cap is, but typically folks who need an exemption are going to have to find an academic position or a position in a nonprofit academic hospital in order to be able to get that H-1B. But that's always an option, right? It's always an option to fulfill the home residence and go home for those 2 years. We always talk about waivers, but certainly from ECFMG's perspective, they really want to see folks fulfill the mission and spirit of the J-1 visa by going home and fulfilling that 2-year home residence requirement and bringing back to your home country what you've learned here. It can be a good option in some cases. All right, let's look ahead a little bit. I'm going to turn away from the questions for a few minutes and let's see, what's ahead? Do I know? Nah, not really, but I'm going to take a stab at it. Okay, so the Build Back Better bill. I'm glad I was reading the news today because it looks like maybe that's going to be tabled until 2022, early in the year. I think the continuing resolution to fund the government is going to expire early February. I had a feeling this was going to happen. They were going to kick the can until the next deadline. Who the heck knows if they're going to pass it then? The one thing to know about this bill is that it currently includes provisions that would help ease the green card backlog by recapturing green cards that were not issued in prior years but should have been, and allowing folks to pay an exorbitant fee in order to skip the backlog line. I have a lot of mixed feelings about it, but ultimately, if it gets my clients green cards, faster, I would love that. I'm a little bit worried since USCIS seems incapable of processing anything in a reasonable time and modernizing their systems to do so, that if they get an influx of these applications in late 2022, that we may see, instead of a backlog because of unavailability of green cards, we may just see a processing backlog that goes on forever. Maybe that's just me being jaded, but I'm a little worried about that. But this bill is out there. It has some good provisions in it. There's a long way to go. It seems like maybe we were almost there, almost getting over the hump of getting something passed. And then today, that seems to be dashed. So stay tuned on the Build Back Better bill. I've talked a few times about USCIS processing times. I don't have a lot more to say about it other than they're bad. And they're very long. I'm seeing a little, some glimmers of hope on green card processing, that I've seen some cases get approved more quickly than I expected, but yet I have cases pending since August of last year, and USCIS is like, that's not too long. You're still within our posted processing times. And I'm like, really? Yeah, August 2020? Those cases should be approved by now. So it's a little bit, we're experiencing some frustration with processing times at USCIS. Be on the lookout. In October 2020, Congress passed a law that allows USCIS to expand premium processing to EADs, to I-539s, and to NIWs. USCIS has not implemented any of that yet. I understand that may not be too far off in the future, and maybe we might see that expansion come in 2022. I will keep my fingers and toes crossed. I really hope we get any of those. Any of those would be great. I'd love all of them. Any of those would be great. I think the downside is that the premium processing fees that Congress is going to allow USCIS to charge on those are maybe higher than the $2,500 we're currently seeing. And it's not necessarily going to be 15-day processing, but we may see some longer period of time for premium processing these particular categories. At the same time, like 45 days on an H4 might be a heck of a lot better than a year. So, that may be worth it to pay the premium processing fee in those cases. We'll have to see when that happens. I also, USCIS told us in June that they would be issuing a regulation to increase fees. They tried it in 2019, 2020, and some of the fees were so exorbitant that they lost in court and that fee list got thrown out. We'll see what this USCIS does in terms of fees, but it's quite possible that USCIS fees are going to go up across the board, and we'll kind of need to see what those look like at the time. And then the last thing is consular processing. And I already mentioned some, information about this. Currently, processing non-immigrant and immigrant visas abroad is taking a while, and it's really unpredictable. I remain hopeful. I mean, when I talked about this in January of this year, when I talked about this with clients last fall, I kept saying, well, surely by the summer of 2021, surely by the fall, winter of 2021, consular processing is going to be back. It's going to be working better. COVID's going to have, we're going to know how to manage all of this. And, surely I was wrong about that. So at the risk of having to say the same thing next year, hopefully at some point in 2022, the dam will break and we'll be able to see a flood of, or maybe even not a flood. Could we just see like a small running stream of consular appointments come through that you don't have to feel like a lottery winner to get one? This should not be so hard. I get the human toll of this. I get the fact that the Department of State is really stretched thin, but maybe they don't have to be. And I really hope that they're able to make some strides in consular processing. I wish that my clients could travel back to visit their families with a lot more certainty, and not the fear that they're going to get stuck there for weeks on end or months on end because their consular appointment got canceled at the last minute and they can't get another one scheduled, and they're just sitting there desperately wanting to come back, their employer desperately wanting them to get back, and just the system is broken. So I really, really hope that we see some positive changes there. I want to just grab a couple more questions out of the queue. Nothing regarding the UK changes anything for J1 waivers, no special rules for UK nationals. Let's see. So, if you get a J1 waiver based on working in an underserved area, we typically can just change your status from J to H in the US. And then the next time you travel abroad, you would then make your appointment and go for a visa interview and obtain an H-1B visa stamp to return to the United States. But you don't have to make a special trip to do that. You can stay in the United States typically and go all the way through from waiver to H, start work without having to step one foot outside the United States. In terms of when you can travel, anytime you work it out with your employer to take vacation time should work. So in terms of green cards, EAD processing, whether marriage-based cases are prioritized over employment, I don't know if I would say that the cases filed inside the United States, that marriage is prioritized over employment. They do seem to take less time. They are prioritized in a certain sense because there's not really a limit on the number of marriage-based green cards that can be issued each year when it comes to spouses of U.S. citizens, but there are limits on the employment-based side. So the accounting is a little different. There are interviews in every marriage-based case, but not in the employment-based side. Right now, though, I will say my marriage-based cases, my best estimate is sometime within a year. And that's the same thing I'm telling my employment-based clients, sometime within a year of filing the adjustment, assuming there's no backlog. So the marriage cases used to go a lot faster, like 4 to 6 months. That's not the case right now in most places where I'm filing. You know, being married still can be faster because you don't have to go through a labor certification. You don't need your employer to sponsor you. It's cheaper, you know, and all of that. But overall, if you're just looking at the adjustment of status, the processing time is about the same. J2 cannot get an H-1B without the J1 getting a waiver. The J1 is going to need a waiver in order for the J2 to get an H-1B. The J2 is similarly subject to the home residence requirement. The J1's waiver will waive that requirement for the J2. J1 changes to H-1B. Theoretically, J2 changes to H-4, and typically USCIS will require consular processing for the J2 to then switch to H-1B. Not always. Sometimes you can go J2, H-4, H-1B without traveling, but they're pretty attuned to that issue. So it's not uncommon for them to have to go obtain an H-1B visa stamp to come back and start work. I know that makes no sense. It's a nonsensical policy, but they won't change it. We've been trying for many years. No, Canadian permanent resident cannot use the Canadian loophole to get an H before a waiver. It only works for Canadian citizens because Canadian citizens don't need visas to enter the US. They just need status approval. But non-Canadian citizens do need a visa stamp. So if you're a Canadian permanent resident, you can't use that loophole. No special green card exemptions for physicians who work with COVID patients. Sadly, we've been trying. No changes on that. No changes that I know of coming with regard to persecution or hardship waivers. Those seem to be those seem to be intact. No real changes on that front. It is not too late to start looking for a Conrad waiver in December. I always tell folks I have 2 waiver seasons. I have the fall waiver season and the spring waiver season. I file waivers in the fall for people, and then I have a whole other waiver season that starts in January. We file them all the way through June in some years. So no, it is not too late, but don't dilly-dally. Get on your job search and, you know, treat it like a second full-time job. It's really important. If you get a J1 waiver based on working in the underserved area, you do not go through the H-1B lottery. You are personally exempt. Doesn't matter if your employer is a for-profit, nonprofit, or any of that stuff. Early medical exams for pending PNIWs. The PNIW regulation says that the doctor does not have to submit a medical exam until they've completed the 5 years, because it will still expire 2 years after the doctor signs the medical. So I do not recommend submitting your PNIW medical exam too early. That also can sometimes trigger a premature approval of your case, which is a mess. So I would be very careful about that. You do not have to leave the United States when your H-1B visa expires. If you're talking about the visa in your passport, if you have an adjustment of status application that's pending, that adjustment application, if properly filed, gives you the authorization to remain in the United States, even if your H-1B lapses. So if you start working on then you could start working pursuant to an EAD. So if your H hasn't been extended, that's okay. The visa stamp in your passport does not govern your stay in the US. Your I-94 does. That question, the last question that came in, the best pathway for a green card while working in a nonprofit academic waiver program, that would be a whole consultation. There are a lot of green card pathways, NIWs, EB1s, employer-sponsored green cards of different stripes. So that is definitely outside the scope of this webinar tonight. Maybe we'll do one next year all about different green card pathways. That's okay. Don't apologize. It's always good to ask the question. Let me go to the next slide. I promised you my contact info. And there you go. So my email address is there. Our firm's phone number is there, but more importantly, our firm website is there. And on the website, there is a portal where you can schedule a consultation appointment, either with me or with any of the lawyers in our firm. Doesn't have to be me. You can kind of scroll through and see what everybody does. We have other lawyers in the firm who also work with physicians very closely, who are, oftentimes able to do consultations with you. And we are more than happy to talk about your questions, your concerns, kind of help give you guidance on all of this stuff. Thank you all so much for attending tonight. I'm sorry if I didn't get to all of the questions, and apologies for my Wi-Fi issues at the beginning, but I really appreciate your attention and your fantastic questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your time this evening, Elissa, and thanks for sharing your expertise with all of us.
My pleasure. Also, I should mention, if anybody's interested, I mentioned my Twitter feed a couple of times. I'm at EJTAUB, and I oftentimes will post Twitter news there, and I also post on LinkedIn as I'm able. So happy to see you all online as well.
All right, everybody have a lovely evening. Again, please mark your calendars for January 18th for our next webinar, which is all about making the most out of PracticeMatch and becoming an attending through using PracticeMatch's services. Have a good evening.